Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today we are going to be talking about my best books of 2021. Apologies in advance if the lighting is a little yellow for your taste. Wintertime sunlight in Seattle is not easy to work with, but I did want to sit down and film this video because, let's be honest, these are absolutely the best videos to watch of the entire year. So here's mine. Overall, 2021 was definitely not my best reading year. I read 58 books, which is nearly half is what I usually read, but worse than that number is just the truly lack of favorites that I read this year. I especially did not have a whole lot of fantasy reads that I really loved, as you guys will see with this list. I have a couple of them, but for the most part, this year was mainly my rom-com era year. A lot of my favorite reads on this list are all romance, which is great because I do enjoy reading romance, but I am missing that fantasy aspect. However, hopefully in 2022, we will kind of bring that love for fantasy back into this channel. But for now, it's time to highlight the best books that I did read in this year. Before getting into my top 10 books of the year, I did just want to include two honorable mentions, one of those being Counting Down to You by Tashi Bhuiyan. This is a YA contemporary romance following our main character Karina. She is a Bangladeshi teen and she usually is more like a wallflower. She keeps her head down, tries to get good grades, put on her best behavior for herself and her family. However, she starts to fall for this bad boy, Ace Clyde, I believe is his full name, and he is actually going to her to be her tutor or his tutor, and so it's like a tutor romance, like friends to forbidden romance kind of deal. And basically Karina has 28 days to kind of rebel against her family and hang out with Ace while her parents are abroad. This was an incredibly cute rom-com that had like the traditional tropes and fun and wholesome feelings while also dealing with like heavier topics. Karina does deal with anxiety and that is a big part of this book. Also, she's dealing with her familial expectations, and although this does have like that rom-com-y feel, it definitely still stays realistic. It doesn't have completely the perfect happy ending that maybe some other YA contemporary romances would have taken. However, it is still really sweet and I really enjoyed this book. I think if you are into YA contemporaries, this one is such a great one, and it was absolutely one of my favorite YA reads of the year in general. So I really liked this one and I highly recommend it. My other honorable mention, and it almost made my top 10 list, was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I am sure you guys are not strangers to this book. This is definitely a like booktube staple. I have been hearing about it for years. This is an autobiography specifically following the author's toxic relationship that she had with another woman. So it has this queer lens looking at a toxic relationship. However, it is told in a very narrative way, a very like story-like fantastical way, has a lot of like magical realism to it, and it is just a really beautiful and powerful story. I am not like a memoir person, I'm not like a biography person. However, this was written so beautifully and tackled a very heavy and hard to read topic in such an amazing way, and it is definitely one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. Highly recommend the audiobook for this one. If you are at all interested in like really beautiful prose and kind of heavier topics, I would definitely recommend checking this out. And honestly, even if you aren't really into those things, I think this is just such a unique read and there really isn't a whole lot out there like it. It's worth reading if you are a reader in general, just to experience it, because it was definitely that, very much an experience and one of the best ones I had all year. Okay, so now we're gonna get into my top 10 books of the year. At the number 10 spot is going to be One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is Casey McQuiston's sophomore novel following August as she gets involved in this kind of time warp romance with a butch lesbian from the 70s. And it deals a lot with August going through this kind of 20s midlife crisis, feelings about not really knowing what she wants to do, not really knowing who she is, and we are following her looking inwards towards herself while also trying to figure out this mystery involving Jane and why she is stuck on the subway. The absolute main thing I love about this book and Casey McQuiston's two books in general is just the way that they write queer friend groups. I see myself so much in these characters and I feel so welcomed and I'm like in an embrace. It just heals like my queer inner child to see these characters interact the way that they do. I definitely think August can be quite annoying in this book for sure, but I also like that she isn't entirely likable either, and I like watching her journey through this book and her kind of not figure everything out, but figure some things out and move towards being like a better person for herself and others. The romance was definitely a little interesting just because of the plot, like the whole time warping romance. It's not like the perfect romance at all, but their interactions, their banter, their love for each other, it still hooked me. I was still convinced. The charisma that Casey is able to exhibit in this book makes me fall in love. And again, I just love the found family in this book. I read this right in the beginning of when I just moved to Seattle, and it was a really great thing to read when I was just stuck on my best friend's couch for a couple months. And it definitely hit me differently in a way that I don't think it would have hit me if I read it any other time. And I really appreciated it. It was a really great read and I highly enjoyed it. At the number 9 spot is a book that I definitely struggled with wanting to put it on this list or where I wanted to put it on this list, but I ultimately decided that this was probably the best point for it, and that is Dark Dawn by Jay Kristoff. This was my first or second read of the year, and it is the concluding novel of the Nevernight trilogy following Mia Corvere, who spends her entire life trying to avenge the killing of her parents by the government, basically. And she goes to this assassin school, she becomes this like super badass assassin, lots of things happen, lots of political things happen, shit hits the fan in many points throughout this series, and this is the conclusion of that. I very recently binged the entire trilogy, so I recently reread this, and I definitely enjoyed it a lot more upon reread. I still loved it when I first read it. However, I was a bit distant from the other two books and like the story as a whole, and it didn't hit me as much as when I just binged it all consecutively. So for that reason, I feel like I can't put it super high on this list, but overall, the Nevernight trilogy truly is probably one of my favorite stories of all time. It is definitely my favorite trilogy of all time. This story is really made for me. It is Assassin's Creed 2 with a female character set in a Roman-esque setting. This book was made for me. It really was. It does everything I needed to do. The humor is amazing. The world building is amazing. Is the author a jackass? Absolutely, but I definitely can't hide my love for this trilogy. So that is unfortunately a red flag on my part, but I did have to place this book here because it definitely was a highlight for me, and it was especially a highlight in the fantasy genre for me for this year. Next book I have is probably, I would say, maybe the most surprising read of the year, and that is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This is is a Hades and Persephone retelling set in like the modern day, and I rented this on Kindle Unlimited. I binged it in basically 2 days, and I freaking fell in love with it, guys. Like, I was so genuinely surprised at how much I enjoyed this for a couple reasons. One of them is that Hades and Persephone retellings just generally don't do it for me, despite my whole aesthetic I have going on. They're usually poorly written. They're usually just not great as a whole. The only one I've really enjoyed is The Dark Wife by, I'm blanking on the author, but I'll put it on the screen here. That is a female-female, beautifully written Hades and Persephone retelling that if you haven't read yet, definitely go and do that right now. But aside from that, and like Lore Olympus, I don't care for them. So I definitely went into this book knowing that I probably won't care for it, and I was proven delightfully wrong. This is Lore Olympus, but sexier. And Lore Olympus is already pretty sexy. This is just more explicit, but it has the humor of Lore Olympus, and also it really does hit on the writing. Like, there were quite a few times where I was reading this book and I was like, wait a minute, that was a beautifully crafted sentence. Hades in here, very, very sexy. Persephone, loved her. Hermes, best character in the book. Love him. Loved him so much. It was just the perfect balance of sex and humor. And that really is all I need in a romance, especially paired with like the fantastical elements of the Greek gods. I think Miss Scarlet knew exactly what she was writing and who she was writing to, and she did not hold back, and she delivered on that intended outcome. And I thank her for it. At the number 7 spot is going to be Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a pre-Columbian inspired fantasy following 3 perspectives. We have Serapio, who is bound to be this vessel for this crow god. We have Ziala, who is this bisexual pirate who is in charge of taking Serapio to the intended sacrifice point. And then we follow this sun priestess who is one of the high-ranking officials at the city in which Serapio is being taken to be sacrificed. So lots of religious politics happening here, lots of just politics happening here, beautiful romance subplot, and very sexy, very much enjoyable, very much giving. This was just the perfect paced novel, and this was also a bit surprising to me because I am definitely not a reader who enjoys skipping timelines and like going back and forth from like backstory to present day to like someday in the past, someday in the future. Like, that does not do it for me. It usually actually takes me out of the story. But Rebecca Roanhorse, she did it so well in this book, and instead of confusing me, it just made me want to read more and more and not put this book down. So beautifully paced, so action-packed, so lovely baked with mythology and folklore and both plot and character action happening. I don't know if any of that was English. Bottom line, I really enjoyed this book. This is definitely my favorite fantasy read of the year, probably by far, and I am just so freaking excited to see where this series goes. At the number 6 spot is going to be This Is How You Lose a Time War by Amal Al-Matar and Max Gladstone. This is about 2 entities, and they are a part of opposing time agencies. Think season 2 Umbrella Academy-esque, and they are at war with one another, the 2 agencies, and they are the best of the 2 agencies. And they basically just leave messages for each other, and they fall in love through these messages. And this is simply the most beautiful, stunning mindfuck of a reading experience. That's the only way I can describe this book. It is a paradox in its entirety. It is somehow the most captivating and engrossing thing you've ever read, while also being extremely confusing and leaving you questioning what the hell is going on throughout the entire thing. It is so beautifully written. It has the purpliest of purple prose to it. It's really hard to explain why I love this book so much, because it truly is a mindfuck of a reading experience, as I said. However, I found myself completely engrossed throughout the entire thing and in love with whatever it was that was happening. And that's really all I needed. That's how enjoyable the writing and the out-of-body experience that this book was able to evoke in me. I loved every minute of it, and I highly recommend just picking this up. Like, even if it's not anything that you think you would enjoy, just try it. Like, just try it, because it is one of the most unique things I've ever read. Just give it a go, because why not? At the number 5 spot is going to be It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. I am not going to harp on this book for too long, because if you are a fan of romance or read romance at all, I am sure you have not only been recommended this book, but have also read it yourself. It's following Piper, our rich socialite, as she goes to this remote fishing village. She meets Brendan, our fisherman captain. They have their own personal individual journeys. They come together. They have experiences and explicit journeys with each other that, thanks to Tessa Bailey's vivid imagination, we get to experience as readers. And you just watch them develop a very sexy and wholesome relationship with one another. And it is one of the best romances I've ever read, and one of the best books I read all year. No complaints really, aside from the shitty sequel, but we won't talk about her. This book was amazing. At the number 4 spot is going to be She Drives Me Crazy by Kelly Quinlan. This is a YA contemporary romance following a basketball player and a star cheerleader and their female-female romance together. I just cannot think about this book or talk about this book without utterly gushing about it. It was just fun. It was just good, wholesome, rom-com goodness reading this book, and I enjoyed it immensely. And not only did it just fill my heart and my stomach with like the cutest butterfly feelings, it also had a really good message to it. This book really demonstrates how platonic, familial, and romantic love should be expressed and felt, and I think that's a really good message to have, especially when your target audience is teenagers. I am not one of those people who think that every single book needs to even have a message to it. I'm okay with just reading something very fun and wholesome, which this book is, but it also managed to have that really good message to it. And all in all, I really enjoyed this book. If you would have told me that a YA contemporary romance was going to be one of my favorite books of the year, I definitely wouldn't have believed you, but I really do think that this book deserves to be here on this list. And if you are at all interested in the genre, I just highly recommend this book. It gave me the same feelings that like 10 Things I Hate About You and like my favorite teenage rom-coms gave me. And for that, I really do thank it for it. And I cannot wait to own this book and have it on my shelves. At the number 3 spot is going to be People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, another book that I am not going to spend a whole lot of time about because I don't think I have watched a single best books of the year list without this being on there. It is following Poppy and Alex and their friends to lovers romance as they go on these summer vacations together. We follow Poppy with her own journey of kind of figuring out what makes her happy and what she really wants in life. And it really is just like a beautifully crafted romance. Definitely one of the best paced romances I've ever read, which is again really ironic because Emily Henry does utilize the like jumping from different time periods and perspectives that again I'm not usually a fan of, but it really works in this book and I highly enjoyed it, like most people in the book community. So I understand that the hype is real with this book, but the hype is definitely warranted. This was just a really amazing read for me this year. All right, and at the number 2 spot is At Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. Talia Hibbert really is my favorite romance author. I love everything that I read by her. The Brown Sisters trilogy, which this is the concluding book of, is immaculate. Favorite romance series I have ever read. There is zero complaints that I can give to any of these books, and let alone this one. I love the way that Talia Hibbert incorporates humor into her stories while also just producing such a genuine, charismatic, and incredible romance in all of her books. She just makes the most believable couples and I fall in love every single time, and this again is no exception. I absolutely adored this book and I am so happy that I will be able to revisit this trilogy for years to come because it is just that good. Talia Hibbert is my romance queen. So grateful for her and so grateful for the characters that she creates. All right, and my number 1 best book of 2021 is going to go to Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is following our main character, Grace, as she is a recent graduate of her PhD program, and she is kind of finally coming to terms with the fact that she has not been living the life that she necessarily wants to be living. She just kind of realizes that she has been so focused on her goals and making her family proud and, you know, making herself proud as well, in that she hasn't been experiencing life. She's been constantly living in the future, not living in the present, and she is letting her life slip away. And now that she doesn't have any goals to kind of look forward to, she is realizing that she doesn't really know who she is. And she makes a very impulsive decision when she goes to Vegas and she gets married. And we are following Grace as she finds her wife and like develops a relationship with her wife. But mainly this book is about Grace and her individual journey and her figuring out herself and what she wants and what she needs. And this book really was so emotional and impactful for me to read. I related a lot to Grace, and I loved the way that Morgan Rogers was able to put my own feelings in such a beautiful way, because this is truly one of the most beautiful books I have ever read, and I cannot help but relate to Grace and just be completely enamored by this book and the messages in it and the themes in it. And again, it just related to me a whole lot. So this is definitely a very personal favorite for me. But overall, this is just beautifully written. One of the best debuts I've ever read. I cannot believe that this is her first book, and I cannot wait to see what this author writes next. Very impactful, very relatable to me, and I'm just so in love with this book and how it impacted me. And I really enjoyed this, and there really is no other book that I can think that would be my number 1 of the year aside from this one. There's no competition. This is my best book of 2021, and I'm so thankful that it exists. Alright, you guys, so those are all of my best books of 2021. Definitely let me know down below what your favorite book of the year was. I would love to know. Hopefully I can give you guys a little bit more content in the next coming year. We'll see what happens. I am definitely excited for 2022, and I am excited for all of the new books I will read and the hopeful eventual favorites that will come into my life. So fingers crossed that happens. Hopefully we get some more fantasy in there, but we're just gonna read and we're just gonna see, and that's all we can do. So with that, hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.